be talking about Turkey in the Middle East, from powerful to powerless, from strategic depth to strategic abyss. And I will quickly introduce her. Dr. Jabour holds an MSc in International Political Economy and International Security from the London School of Economics and a PhD from Sciences Po. Dr. Jabour is an expert on contemporary Turkey with a focus on Turkey's foreign policy in the Middle East under the Justice and Development Party and President Erdogan's rule. And her book will be published in 2016 with the Presse Universitaire de France and translated into English and Arabic and Turkish. She is a lecturer at Sciences Po and a research associate at the Centre de Recherche International and Institut de Recherche sur le Moyen-Orient, where her research and publications mostly focus on the MENA region and political economy and international relations. She is also a co-founder of a research group on rising powers in the international system, whose aim is to examine the role of the BRICS and other rising middle powers in world governance. In addition to her research work, Dr. Jabour is an external consultant for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a regular speaker in various media outlets and a commentator in newspapers. And what's interesting for us for her Thursday lecture is that Dr. Jabour is a co-founder and shareholder of Sama Media, the first Arab citizen media, covering the political, cultural, and economic dynamics at work in the MENA region, and the platform has reached 1 million viewers and subscribers worldwide and has been broadcasted with Al Jazeera and France 24 and the website of The Guardian and Al Pais. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Turkey in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Nele. I feel very honored and delighted to be here today and to have this great opportunity to share a few thoughts with your distinguished audience. I would like to seize this opportunity to thank you, Nele, for this invitation, and to thank Sharifa for her precious assistance with the logistics and practical side of this conference. And I would like to say that I'm very, very happy to see one of my former students at Sciences Po here. She's interning with you. So great to see you, Laurine. I would like to start my talk by comparing two situations. One in 2010, so right before the Arab revolutions, and the other in 2015, 2016, so as we speak today. In 2010, Paul Salim, who was at the time the director of the Carnegie Research Center in Beirut, wrote that the 21st century might be Turkey's century, because it's the only country in the Middle East actually pointing toward the future. 5 years later, in 2015, Cengiz Aktar, who's one of the most renowned Turkish journalists, wrote that Turkey is about to become the next failed state in the Middle East. In 2010, the Maryland University conducted a poll in the Arab world, in the Middle East, to sort of understand the views that the Arab peoples have about Turkey. To the question, looking at the international, basically it was the first months of 2011. So to the question, looking at the international reaction to the events in the Arab world in the past few months, which two countries do you believe played the most constructive role? 50% of the respondents chose Turkey. To the question, as you look ahead toward the presidential elections in Egypt, which of the following leaders would you like to see as a president? 31% of respondents chose Erdogan as their first choice or as their favorite president. And to the question, which world leader outside your own country do you admire most? 22% of the respondents actually chose Recep Tayyip Erdogan. While 5 years later, in 2015, by December 2015, another poll was conducted by the TESEV Statistics Center in Turkey, and it showed that only 5% of the respondents, Arab respondents, considered that Turkey is a good regional power, and only 10% of the respondents consider that Erdogan is a good leader or is a regional leader in the Middle East. So the question here is to know what went wrong for Turkey in the Middle East. While Turkey in the 2000s was seen as a rising star in the Middle East and as a major regional power, very recently it has lost much of its appeal, and it seems to be a powerless state in the Middle East. And so to analyze Turkey's policy vis-à-vis the Arab world and to examine Turkey's regional status, I would like to address the following points. First, I'll talk about the rationale behind Turkey's engagement in the Middle East in the 2000s. What drove Turkey into the Middle East, especially knowing that for much of the 20th century, Turkey was completely disconnected from the Arab neighborhood, simply because, according to Mustafa Kemal, the founder of the Turkish Republic, the Arab world was seen as backward, underdeveloped, and was seen as a national security threat for Turkey. So how come that this state ideology has actually changed and Turkey was able to embrace or re-embrace the Arab neighborhood? Second, I will discuss the strategies and the tools that Turkey used in the 2000s in order to emerge as a regional leader in the Middle East. And I will actually show that these strategies are not at all specific to Turkey. They are actually common to all rising middle powers. And to that extent, I think we can compare Turkey with the BRICS, China, Russia, or India, and what they are doing in their regional sphere of influence. Third, I will talk about the challenge that the Arab revolutions posed for Turkey. What was the response that Turkey formulated to the Arab Spring? And I'll try to establish a nexus between Turkey's response to the Arab Spring and Turkey's domestic politics. To what extent the difficulties that Turkey is facing in the Middle East in the post-Arab Spring era are actually contributing to a sort of deterioration of internal politics in Turkey. And finally, I will conclude with a few thoughts about the current situation in Turkey and future prospects, future challenges for Turkey at the national, regional, and international levels. So it would not be an overstatement to say that for much of the 20th century, Turkey divorced the Arabs. In fact, the Arab or the Turkish Republic was founded in 1923 on the idea that one of the reasons for the collapse of the Ottoman Empire was the multi-ethnic and multicultural nature of this empire and the fact that Arabs were able to betray the Ottoman state. So since the foundation of the Turkish Republic, there was this idea that the Arabs are the enemy, the Arabs are traitors. And then the Cold War further contributed to widening this rift between Turks and Arabs since they both chose different or opposing sides during the Cold War. Turkey chose obviously to align with the Western Bloc, while the Arab Nationalist Republic chose to follow the USSR. And also something quite important is that in 1949, Turkey was the first Muslim majority country to officially recognize Israel, which obviously alienated the Arab world. By contrast, in the 2000s, we see a rapprochement between Turkey and the Middle East and Arab world. So following the strategy of zero problems with the neighbors, Turkey developed very close relations with all Arab states. Turkey renounced to its hard power stance and adopted a cooperation approach vis-à-vis the Middle East and the Arab world. And also, in a liberal perspective, Turkey sought to establish peace in the region through trade and economic interdependence. So here, for example, you have all the free trade agreements that were signed bilaterally with each of the Arab countries. And also in 2010, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, at that time Prime Minister of Turkey, suggested the establishment or the creation of a free trade zone between Turkey, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And he suggested that this free trade zone would be called the Shamgan space. Shamgan, of course, echoing the Schengen space. Sham meaning in Turkish and in Arabic languages, the Levant region, the region of the Mashriq. So how come, concretely speaking, how come that in the 2000s Turkey was really able to see the Arab world through another light, through a more positive light, and to re-embrace this region? Now, one very widespread argument that is put forward in the literature today, mainly in Western literature, is to say that Turkey engaged with the Middle East because in 2002, a new political party seized power. It's the Justice and Development Party, or what is known as the AKP. And because the AKP is an Islamist party, it actually embraced the Arab world out of Islamism or pan-Islamism. I think that this argument is quite naive and is quite shaky, mainly for two reasons. First of all, the fact that there is no such thing as an Islamist foreign policy. A foreign policy is generally driven by pragmatic interests and not only by ideology. In fact, even the Islamic Republic of Iran conducts its foreign policy not only out of ideology, but out of material interests. And the second reason why this argument is shaky is that if we take a closer look at Turkey's diplomacy in the 2000s, we see that the AKP developed close relations not only with Muslim countries, but with countries all over the world, Christian countries, for example, in Latin America, also, for example, in South Africa. So the argument does not really stand. And so I would argue instead that Turkey's engagement in the Middle East in the 2000s, rather than being driven by a sort of pan-Islamism, is actually a symptom of a rising power. Turkey is a middle rising power in search for status, influence, and recognition in world affairs. And Turkey has been instrumentalizing the Middle East. Turkey has been using the Middle East as a hinterland in order to gain a bigger strategic value and in order to gain a bigger influence and power in the international system. And in fact, this very instrumental vision of the Middle East was first formulated by Ahmet Davutoglu, who is currently the Prime Minister of Turkey and who was formerly Turkey's Minister of Foreign Affairs. In fact, in 2001, Ahmet Davutoglu, so way before the AKP came to power, Ahmet Davutoglu published a book in Turkish language. The book made 600 pages, and it was called Strategic Depth, Turkey's International Position. And so to date, we don't have a translation into English, so the book is only available in Turkish, in Greek, and in Albanian languages. Now, what does Ahmet Davutoglu actually say or argue in this book? His argument is that today, in the international system, we have two categories of states. We have central states, merkez ülke in Turkish, and peripheral states, or kanat ülke in Turkish. What's the difference? Well, the difference is a very easy one. Central states are all these developed Western states who are major powers today in the world system and who have major influence in world affairs. Whereas, on the other hand, peripheral states are all these developing countries who continue to be sort of excluded of world governance. And Ahmet Davutoglu regrets in his book that Turkey had thus far failed to be a major power and a central state. And he actually attributes this failure to the short-sightedness of the traditional Kemalist elites in Turkey. He says that with the end of the Cold War, these elites did not really understand that the world has changed, that the structural and ideational context of foreign policy making has changed, and that Turkey no longer needed to pursue a unidimensional foreign policy of alignment with the West, but it really needed now to diversify its foreign policy options and to conduct a multidimensional foreign policy. And so from there, Ahmet Davutoglu says that if Turkey wants to become a major power in the 21st century, then Turkey needs to take advantage of what he calls its strategic depth. Strategic depth is this ability of Turkey to develop an active and a multi-dimensional policy of influence in all surrounding regions and in all the territories that were once part of the Ottoman Empire. Because Turkey has historical and cultural links with these territories, with these regions, then Turkey should be able to develop an active policy of influence there. But while Davutoglu acknowledges that all surrounding regions are important for Turkey, he suggests that Turkey gives a priority to the Middle East. Turkey should first and foremost develop an active foreign policy in the Middle East. Why the Middle East? Because simply for him, the Middle East is a strategic, crucial region today for the international balances of power. He says that the Middle East is at the heart of Eurasia. And so quoting Nicholas Spikeman and Halford Mackinder, he says that whoever controls the Middle East controls the heart of Eurasia and will be able to control the world. And actually, he devotes the two biggest parts of his book to the Middle East. And the chapters devoted to the Middle East have very symbolic titles. One of them is called The Middle East, a Necessary Hinterland for Turkey. And the other one is called The Middle East, Key to Global Geopolitical and Economic International Balances. So he says very clearly that given the importance of the Middle East, we should take advantage of our strategic depth there in order to emerge as a regional leader in this region and ultimately demand a better status in world affairs. So you have a very, very instrumental vision of the Middle East. Turkey's engagement there is not an objective per se of foreign policy. It is rather a means to another end, which is Turkey's accession to the status of big power. And what's quite interesting to note also in this book is that Ahmed Davutoglu establishes a sort of dialectical relationship between Turkey's engagement in the Middle East and Turkey's chances to be accepted in the European Union. And I'm quoting him. He says, "We should understand our foreign policy in the Middle East through the metaphor of the archery. The more we pull in the Middle East and the further we land in Europe." Obviously, this game backfired today, and I'll show how. But initially, this was the vision. You get engaged in the Middle East, you get a bigger strategic value, and so you appeal to the West and to the European Union. Now, the vision of Ahmed Davutoglu could have remained just a theoretical vision. It could have remained just ink on paper and never materialized into actual foreign policy conduct. But in fact, circumstances played in favor of Ahmed Davutoglu and pushed him or propelled him at the forefront of policy making in Turkey. In fact, at the political level, we see that in 2002, the Justice and Development Party arrives to power. And basically, this was a very new party. It was born just a year prior to his victory in the parliamentary elections of 2002. It was born in August 2001. And so when the party seized power, it had absolutely no experience in terms of foreign policy making. So they searched for somebody who would be their policy advisor. And given that Ahmed Davutoglu had published this book, and given that he had a reputation of being conservative and of having Islamic or even Islamist affinities, he was actually appointed first as special advisor to the Prime Minister on Foreign Affairs in 2003. Then he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2009, becoming Prime Minister in 2014. And with this, I think that Ahmed Davutoglu became among the very rare intellectuals worldwide who actually were nominated into an official position and were granted the opportunity to put their foreign policy vision into practice. Apart from Kissinger and Brzezinski, I can't think of any other intellectual who was granted this opportunity. And so, since the beginning of the 2000s, Ahmed Davutoglu was really the architect of Turkey's diplomacy vis-à-vis the Arab world. And just to give you an anecdote, today, in the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, diplomats and bureaucrats have to follow courses and training sessions in the evening, teaching them the vision of Ahmed Davutoglu and the book, the 600-page book of Ahmed Davutoglu. So this really gives you an idea of how influential he actually is. And also at the economic level, what we see is that the 2000s were marked by the rise of Turkey as a trading state. Turkey was in search for new markets. And so opening up to Arab states seemed to be a rational strategy in order to take advantage of the huge opportunities offered by the Middle East markets. And also at the economic level, we see that in the 2000s, we witnessed the emergence of a new business elite, a new Islamic bourgeoisie composed of businessmen from Anatolia. Basically, these businessmen were very liberal and capitalist on the economic level, but they were very conservative at the cultural and religious level. And so they were very much in favor of Turkey's rapprochement with the Arab world. They wanted to trade with the Arab world and not with European countries. These Anatolian businessmen came to be known as the Anatolian tigers, by analogy to the Asian tigers, because they knew very rapid growth rates since the 1970s and the industrialization of Turkey. And they are actually represented by an interest group or a lobby called the Musiad. And obviously the Musiad has very close links to the AKP, so they lobby the AKP government. So all these conditions actually converged to make the rapprochement with the Arab world feasible. Now, from there, Turkey tried to imagine new tools, new instruments, and new strategies to reconquer the Middle East and to assert its regional leadership in the area of the Arab world. Now, the first strategy that was used by the AKP government is to formulate or to invent a new political and civilizational discourse. Now, I think that this new discourse was mainly based on three elements. The first one was obviously Israel bashing. Turkey understood that the road to the hearts and minds of Arabs and Muslims passes through Jerusalem and through Gaza. And so Turkey tried to position itself as the champion of the Palestinian cause. Recep Tayyip Erdogan wanted to appear as the new Gamal Abdel Nasser of the region. Now, this Israel bashing actually crystallized around two major episodes. The first episode was in May 2009 in the Forum of Davos. In fact, in the Forum of Davos, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who was Prime Minister of Turkey, participated in a joint panel with Shimon Peres. And in the middle of the panel, he just raises his hand, he claims more speaking time, and then he looks at Shimon Peres and he tells Shimon Peres, when it comes to killing, you know very well how to kill, you are a terrorist state. He was actually very angry because a few months earlier, in December 2008, Israel conducted a very aggressive operation against Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, where Israel used biological weapons against civilians. And so he wanted to take the revenge of Palestinians, and he just asserted this very harsh statement. The other episode of Israel bashing was the Mavi Marmara story. In fact, in May 2010, the Turkish government, together with a Turkish NGO, sent a flotilla to Gaza carrying humanitarian aid, so medicine and food. Basically, it was an attempt to break the siege imposed by Israel on Gaza. Now, the flotilla, the boat, was attacked by Israel and 9 Turkish activists were killed. And so Erdogan capitalized on this moment in order to claim an official apology for Israel and in order to claim that from now on, Turkey will always defend the Palestinian cause because these are Mazlumin. The Palestinians are Mazlumins. They are oppressed. And what you see is that this Israel bashing actually produced real concrete effects in the Arab world in terms of increasing the popularity of Turkey and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Here, for example, you see on the left a drawing or a portrait of Erdogan, which was painted by a Palestinian artist and sent as a gift to pay tribute to this champion of the Palestinian cause. You see on the right a picture of young kids in a mosque wearing a t-shirt with the photo of Erdogan and carrying the Turkish flag. And then you see also a graduation ceremony in the University of Birzeit in Palestine, in which a Palestinian student, a Palestinian young graduate, actually decided to receive her diploma and to go on the stage while carrying the image of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. She really wanted to say that he's her leader. What you see also is that when the Maryland University conducted its poll, it is in 2010 that Recep Tayyip Erdogan's popularity really skyrocketed in the region. But what's also quite interesting to see is that despite all this Israel bashing, Turkey continued business as usual with Israel behind the scenes. In fact, trade continued, and basically the volume of trade between the two countries is almost $3 billion. Tourism between the two countries flourished, and if you want, the cooperation agreements between Turkey and Israel that were signed in the 1990s were not at all revoked. So you see very clearly how Turkey is being a pragmatic state, trying to diversify its foreign policy options without jeopardizing its national interests. Now, the second element of this discourse, of this new political discourse, was third worldism. In fact, throughout the 2000s, the Turkish leaders always criticized the current world order, which was based, according to him, on non-representation, non-political representation, because the 5 veto powers at the UN do not represent the whole world. For them also, the current world order is economically unjust because of the huge inequalities between the North and the South. It is also culturally exclusive because there is only one dominant culture, which is the Western culture that is promoted worldwide. And so, in parallel to this criticism of the current world order, Turkey promoted a new world order that would be based, I'm quoting them, on more justice, on more political participation and representation, cultural inclusiveness, and a balance between interests and moral ethics. And obviously, this kind of third world discourse is quite appealing for Arabs who consider themselves as victims of the current order, who consider themselves as being excluded, as being marginalized, and as being the oppressed today. And also, another element of this third world discourse was to actually promise the Arab world that Turkey would empower them. The whole idea was to say that if Arabs accept to form a sort of commonwealth that gravitates around Turkey, then they would immediately have access to modernity, to development, to prosperity. Because Turkey is a modern and global state, then Turkey can give to the Arab world an access to the modern world. And finally, the third element of this discourse was Turkey's insistence on its belonging to the Islamic and Oriental civilization. Turkey always, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Ahmet Davutoglu always stressed that Turkey belongs to this civilization, and this was only, in my personal view, it was only an attempt to legitimize Turkey's contemporary leadership of the Middle East. We have historical ties with you, so we are a good representative of your interests. Now, the second strategy used by the AKP government to assert its regional leadership over the Middle East was to use soft power. Soft power is obviously defined by Joseph Nye as the ability of a country to get what it wants through attraction rather than coercion. And in his book, Joseph Nye actually identifies two main components of soft power. The first one is education. To what extent you can attract students worldwide through your education system and form a sort of new future elite that regards you in a very positive light. And the second component is popular culture. So everything which has to do with movies, soap operas, video clips, etc. And in fact, during the 2000s, Turkey's soft power in direction of the Arab world was based on these two elements. Talking about education, Turkey in 2005 created a new program called Türkiye Bursları, which means Turkish scholarships. Basically, it's a program financed by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Interior, by which Turkey grants a scholarship to students from the Arab world. And we consider that to date, some 1,200 Arab students have actually benefited from this program, and they came essentially from Iraq, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Qatar, and Kuwait. Also in 2007, Turkey created cultural centers called Yunus Emre. Yunus Emre is actually a Turkish poet of the 12th and 13th century. He's known to be very tolerant, open to other cultures, etc. And actually these cultural centers, which were spread worldwide, offered free Turkish language courses to students or to any person who wanted to learn Turkish. And today we have 33,000 Arab students enrolled in language programs at Yunus Emre centers across the Middle East. So obviously these efforts are aiming to create a new Turcophone or even a Turcophile elite in the Arab world. And what we see, and this is something that I closely examined, is that once Arab students who received a scholarship from Turkey, once they come back to their home country, they start establishing friendship associations with Turkey. For example, today you have an Egyptian-Turkish Friendship Association, a Lebanese-Turkish Friendship Association. So these associations actually organize cultural activities in their home countries whose objective is to raise awareness on Turkey and Turkey's good and benign role in the Middle East. The second component of Turkey's soft power was obviously the export of Turkish soap operas, the musalsalat. Turkey mainly exported three categories of soap operas: romantic soap operas that aimed at showing Turkey as a very ideal society in which Islam coexists with modernity, in which people have a modern lifestyle while being very attached to their Islamic values and traditions. You have also another category, which is historical soap operas. For example, this one was very, very famous in the Middle East, Muhtasham Yüzyıl, Harim al-Sultan. Harim al-Sultan is the story of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his love story with Hürrem. And basically, these kind of soap operas showed the Arab world the historical links that tie the Middle East with the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, the ear of this empire. And the third category of soap operas were political action or thriller soap operas like Wadi Ziab, Kurtlar Vadisi, in which actually Turkey was portrayed as the champion of Arab causes. For example, in Wadi Ziab, you have an intelligence officer, Turkish intelligence officer, who goes to Palestine in order to fight against the Mossad, and you see how he is championing the Palestinians, etc., etc. So obviously, these soap operas have conquered the hearts and minds of Arabs, and they have really promoted a very good image of Turkey. The third strategy used by Turkey was to embark in mediation efforts across the Middle East. You see Turkey for the first time mediating between Fatah and Hamas in Palestine, between Israel and Syria on the Golan Heights in 2007, between the Iraqi factions in 2005 to help them form a government. You see Turkey mediating in Lebanon in 2008 to help people elect a new president. And obviously, don't forget that Turkey was the first country to actually mediate on the Iranian nuclear crisis, because Turkey signed in 2010 a trilateral agreement with Brazil and Iran, actually solving or forming a first attempt to find a solution to the Iranian nuclear crisis. Now, I think that the objectives of these mediation efforts were twofold. On the regional level, obviously, they aimed at making Turkey appear as a benign power, a power that wants peace in the Middle East. But also, and we tend to forget it, on the other hand, on the international level, these mediating efforts were just a kind gesture toward the West. Turkey wanted to show the West that, look, there are many problems in the Middle East. We can help you solve some of these problems, but in return, please recognize us as a power. Please give us a share in world governance. Please give us some structural gains. And so I think that through mediation, Turkey was doing burden sharing in order to claim power sharing. This is what I call the bakshish diplomacy. Bakshish is the tip that you give to a waiter in a restaurant. Turkey was doing a favor to the West and waiting for a tip. Tip, which is, for example, its accession to the European Union. And the fourth and last strategy used by Turkey was what I would call split diplomacy. In fact, what made Turkey very attractive in the eyes of Arabs was precisely the ability of Turkey to develop very strong relations with Middle Eastern countries, while at the same time having excellent relations with Western countries. This is the essence of split diplomacy, being able to have a foot in the East and a foot in the West, a foot in the North and a foot in the South. And in Arabs' eyes, Turkey was the model of this Muslim country, which is very oriental, but which can be listened to by Western countries, something that Arabs are not able to do, actually. But here I would like to draw your attention to the fact that all these strategies that I mentioned are not specific to Turkey. In fact, they are specific to China, to Brazil, to South Africa, to India. Today, all these middle and rising powers can use these strategies, whereas big major powers cannot use them. Big powers cannot practice split diplomacy. They cannot practice mediation efforts simply because they are seen as biased and they are seen as, having a condescending attitude toward other small states. So in the 2000s, and thanks to all these strategies, Turkey achieved regional power status in the Middle East. Erdogan was presented as the big leader, and Turkey was portrayed as the model for the Arab world, the model of a Muslim, secular, modern, liberal, and democratic country. But the Arab revolutions are going to sort of shake the achievements of Turkey in the Middle East. In fact, the Arab revolutions really represented a big challenge for Turkey because they threatened Turkey's successes in the Middle East during the past decade. In fact, during the 2000s, Turkey built excellent relations with the Arab authoritarian regimes who were now about to disappear. And in that sense, I think that the Arab Spring has shaken the foundations and the grounds on which Turkey's foreign policy has so far rested. The Arab revolutions actually created a sort of dilemma for the Turkish government, a dilemma between what Ziya Öniş calls a dilemma between idealism and pragmatism, or between interests, self-interests, and ethics. To say it more clearly, actually the Arab revolutions provided Turkey with only two options. The first option was to side with the revolutionaries, to adopt an idealist approach, an ethical approach, siding with the revolutionaries. But this would mean jeopardizing the excellent relations that Turkey had built with the Arab authoritarian regimes. And the second option is to just ignore the revolutionaries, ignore their demands. But this would mean taking the risk of appearing as a bad power, as a status quo power, which actually endorses authoritarianism in the region. And in my opinion, despite the huge buzz about Turkey today, I think that after all, Turkey privileged a realpolitik approach, a very pragmatic approach, and Turkey always actually favored and defended its own national interest in dealing with the Arab revolutions. And I'll take the Arab revolutions case by case. First of all, let's consider Tunisia. Actually, when the Tunisian revolution started, Turkey did not even have the chance to react to it, simply because Ben Ali was toppled and overthrown very quickly. But when Ghannouchi presented himself as a candidate, Recep Tayyip Erdogan quickly stepped in order to endorse him. Now today, you might say, yes, he endorsed him because Ghannouchi is an Islamist, and so, this is Islamist solidarity. This is one way of reading things. But there's another way of reading it. In fact, you have to see that since the 1970s, Erdogan and Ghannouchi have been very, very close friends. They have met in different places all over the world. They have a friendship, a personal friendship relationship. And so for Turkish policymakers, if Ghannouchi comes to power in Tunisia, then Tunisia would be a client state for Turkey, or at least it would be a very, very close state to Turkey, and Turkey would be able to form this commonwealth in the Arab world that gravitates around Ankara. Take the example of Libya. In the beginning of the Libyan revolution, the Turkish government was very, very reluctant to take position against Gaddafi, for both political and economic reasons. Politically speaking, Erdogan and Gaddafi were very close to each other, and hold your breath, but actually in the beginning of 2010, Recep Tayyip Erdogan received Gaddafi's award for human rights. Also, economically speaking, Turkey had huge investments in Libya, $23 billion of investments, mainly in the infrastructure sector. So Turkey didn't want to jeopardize these interests. So Turkey did not say anything about Gaddafi. It is only when the NATO intervention in Libya was imminent that Turkey had to actually take side and had to participate in this NATO intervention in order not to alienate its fellow members of the NATO. But here also it's very interesting to see that while Turkey accepted to participate in the NATO intervention, it accepted to do that only on its own conditions. In particular, Turkey accepted to participate in the humanitarian missions of this intervention and not in the military operations, not in the bombings. So that if Gaddafi stays in power, Turkey can always say, well, we participated in the NATO intervention, but just the humanitarian side. And when Gaddafi was finally toppled, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, here again, was very pragmatic and rational. He was the first world leader to actually go to Benghazi, to endorse the transitional council there, and to give this transitional council a $1 billion of financial support just for post-war reconstruction efforts in Libya. So he wanted to sort of co-opt this revolutionary movement as quickly as possible. Let's take the example of Egypt now. When the revolution started on the 25th of January 2011, Recep Tayyip Erdogan actually sided with the revolutionaries against Mubarak, but here again, this was very rational. In fact, in the 2000s, and despite the rapprochement between Turkey and Egypt, Mubarak and Erdogan had some sort of distant relations simply because both of them were vying for regional leadership. Both of them were rivals in the Middle East. And so when the revolution erupted, Turkey decided to support the revolutionaries, but here again, in a very light way. So there was no use of harsh rhetoric against Mubarak. Recep Tayyip Erdogan only said to the revolutionaries or to Mubarak that he needed to listen to the demands of the people. That was it. When Mubarak was toppled and Morsi was presented himself as a candidate, Turkey immediately stepped in to endorse him. And here I want to tell you something that is not covered in the media, which is that the electoral campaign of Morsi was not organized in Cairo. It was actually organized in Istanbul. The AKP government paid tickets for the Muslim Brothers to go to Istanbul every week and to follow seminars and training sessions about how to transform from a brotherhood to a party, how to organize an electoral campaign, how to organize votes and elections, how to set up the ballot boxes, etc., etc. Now, why did they do that? It's very rational. Basically, they considered that if the Muslim Brothers win power in Egypt, they are an unexperienced political party. And so Morsi would always look at Turkey as his godfather. And so Egypt would de facto become a client state for Turkey. And so Egypt would de facto cease to look for regional leadership. And when Morsi was toppled, Recep Tayyip Erdogan also endorsed him against SCC. Why is that? Very rational. Simply because the toppling of Morsi actually coincided exactly with the beginning of the Gezi Park protest movement inside Turkey in July 2013. And one way for Erdogan to actually boost its popularity in Turkey and to rally the people around him was to say, look at what happened in Egypt. An Islamist government was toppled by a coup d'etat just because he was Islamist. Gezi Park is actually a conspiracy against us. these people are preparing a coup d'etat against us because we are Islamists. So please rally around me. And so in all the electoral meetings that he held, Recep Tayyip Erdogan raised his four fingers as a sign of solidarity with the Rabi'a movement of Morsi. But this was just for domestic political purposes. And you have to see that the argument developed by Erdogan was very strong for his own constituency, because Islamists in Turkey have suffered a lot in the past from coup d'etat, and they don't want to go back to this era of coup d'etat against them. And finally, we reach Syria. Now, we tend to forget it, but at the beginning of the Syrian crisis, Turkey stood very, very firm with Bashar al-Assad. In fact, here again, hold your breath, but from March 2011 to August 2011, Davutoglu and Erdogan visited Bashar al-Assad 61 times in Damascus. So they kept on going to Damascus, paying official visits to Bashar al-Assad to convince him to give some concessions to the revolutionaries so that he can stay in power. Because Bashar al-Assad was Turkey's closest ally in the region, so they desperately needed him to stay in power. But everything changed in August 2011. Why? Because in the last meeting between Erdogan and Bashar al-Assad, Bashar said to Erdogan, you're my friend, but I don't take advice from foreign governments. And knowing the ego of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he felt very humiliated. And this was a story that people shared with me in Ankara, in the Turkish government. He came back to Ankara, he called for an urgent meeting, and he said, he's no longer our proxy. He's no longer an obedient friend. So we just have to topple him as soon as possible. So there's a very personal factor in Turkey's policy vis-à-vis Syria, which seems to be naive for us, but this is how things went on. Of course, there was another political argument, which is that in August 2011, Bashar al-Assad harshly repressed the revolutionaries using biological weapons, so it was no longer ethical for Turkey to support Bashar. But still, there was a mix of political argument plus a very personal argument. And I think that since the moment Erdogan decided to topple Bashar al-Assad, Turkey actually committed a fatal mistake. Turkey shifted from a policy of adaptation to change in the Middle East to a policy of driving change in the Middle East. So far, Turkey had just watched the Arab Spring silently and reacted to it. Now, Turkey believed that it is Ankara's moment. Ankara is so strong, it can change regimes in the region. And this is a fatal error, because no one has actually the capability to change dynamics in the Middle East. And this shift in policy and in the conception of diplomacy was actually very clear in a symbolic statement made by Ahmet Davutoglu. He said in January 2012, a new Middle East is about to be born. We will be the owner, the pioneer, and the servant of this new Middle East. Turkey will guide the winds of change in the region. So we're now acting and no longer reacting. And since this moment, Turkey started to accumulate mistakes. The first mistake was that in order to topple Assad, Turkey provided logistical and financial support to Daesh. And it's very important to see that Turkey supported Daesh not out of any ideological connivance with this movement. In fact, the jihadist version of Islam followed by Daesh is quite different from the political Islam of AKP. But they supported Daesh simply because they saw this movement as a tool or as an instrument to topple Assad on the short term. And then on the long term, you can just get rid of it. And I had an interview with the one person in the government at the beginning of the Syrian crisis, and he told me, you know, Daesh, so he made this gesture, they are under our control. So we're using them, and then we're going to get rid of them. And it is only too late that Turkey realized that Daesh has its own agenda, that Daesh is a monster that has gotten out of the bottle, and that Daesh started to actually represent a real national security threat for Turkey, as we've seen in the Reyhanli attack, in the Diyarbakir attack, in the Ankara and Istanbul bombings. And the second error that Turkey committed is its relations with the Kurds during the Kobani episode. In 2014, in the summer of 2014, the city of Kobani at the border, it's known as Ain al-Arab in Arabic, it's a city at the border between Syria and Turkey, It is a city inhabited by Syrian Turkmens. So this city was under siege by Daesh, and the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, decided to actually launch a war against Daesh, to get rid of Daesh. Turkey stood silently. Why? Well, simply because it's not only out of support for Daesh, but simply because Turkey is haunted by what I call a Sèvres syndrome. The Sèvres syndrome is the fact that since the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, which dispossessed the Ottoman Empire of its Arab provinces, since that time, Turkey is inhabited by the obsession or the fear that there is an international conspiracy against it and that people want to disintegrate the Turkish territory. So Turkey thought that if Kurds established an autonomy in Kobane, then that would have a de facto domino effect inside Turkey, pushing Kurds of Turkey to establish their own state. Now, of course, and this was a very counterproductive policy, because it portrayed Turkey as a power that stands with Daesh against the good people who are the Kurds. So at the end of the day, Turkey's short-sighted policy in Syria has had detrimental effects inside Turkey, so in the internal politics of Turkey. First of all, in terms of security, as I said, today Daesh is posing a real threat. In terms of the economic effects of the Syrian crisis, today we have a huge influx of Syrian refugees inside Turkey, more than 2.5 million refugees, who are obviously straining the Turkish economy. But actually, I would say that despite the huge economic effects of the Syrian refugees, Turkey still wants to host them simply because, one, it wants to appear as a humanitarian power, as a power which is hospitable to others. And second, because the Turkish government wants to use the Syrian refugee crisis as a bargaining tool with the European Union. They want to restart accession talks with the EU by blackmailing the European Union through this crisis. And also, this Syrian crisis has had political effects inside Turkey in terms of creating polarization in the country, polarization between Turks and Kurds, but also polarization between Alevis and Sunnis in mixed cities like Mardin, for example, and obviously polarization between the AKP and the Kemalist opposition, which sees the government's policy vis-à-vis Syria as a disaster. And finally, I would say that this Syrian crisis actually also caused a rigidification of the Turkish regime in the inside. Because the AKP was facing problems in the region, it became paranoid, and so it wanted to absolutely conduct a witch hunt against the opposition inside Turkey, and so this has led to a drift toward an authoritarian style of governance. And I think that authoritarianism of the AKP was epitomized by the way they repressed the Gezi Park revolt. As you know, the Gezi Park revolt was just a protest movement in the heart of Taksim Square in Istanbul. It was a movement that mobilized different peoples with different interests. Actually, people took to the streets because they had different grievances against the government. First of all, a political grievance, the fact that the government was becoming more and more authoritarian. Second, I would say an economic grievance, which is the excessive capitalism implemented by the AKP. And actually, the protest movement was sparked by the decision of the AKP government to destroy a park, to cut trees, and to build in the place of the park a mall, a commercial mall. And also, I would say the third reason why people took to the street was just a social, cultural reason, which is the fact that people perceived that Turkey is going toward more and more Islamization of the society. So I would say that this movement, if you want, the Gezi Park movement, was at the intersection of the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Arab revolutions. Occupy Wall Street because it was against capitalism, and Arab revolutions because it was against the authoritarian rule of the AKP. And obviously, the Erdogan's government response was very, very harsh. Not only he used violence against the protesters, but he also imposed a media blackout. So here you have an image in which CNN Turk was actually broadcasting a documentary about penguins while people were dying in the streets in Taksim Square. Erdogan also tried to completely discredit the opposition by presenting them as çapulcular. Çapulcular is a word in Turkish which basically can be translated as looters, vandals, gangsters. And so, given this, we can wonder, where is Turkey standing today and where is it heading to? I would say that on the regional level, the Syrian crisis has caused Turkey to be in a situation of complete isolation. In fact, Turkey's meddling in the Syrian crisis has caused Turkey to have, or has pushed Turkey to have, very negative relations with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Iran, with Iraq, and with Russia. So I think that the zero problems with the neighbors policy shifted toward a zero neighbor without problem. The strategic depth in the region turned into a strategic abyss. And what's extremely dangerous is that the AKP government continues to deny this situation of isolation. In fact, Ahmed Davutoglu says, we are not isolated, we are in a situation of what he calls precious loneliness. Precious loneliness means that we are lonely, but we are lonely because we are defending values, we are defending ethics, we are defending human rights. So if you want, the concept of precious loneliness is just a very smart way to sublimate failure. Also, what we see is that the Syrian crisis has caused a collapse of the appeal of the Turkish model in the Arab world. Turkey is more and more seen as a sectarian power, siding with Sunnis against Shias and Alawites. And Turkey is seen as, practicing repressive policies against its own people, just like Mubarak and Ben Ali have done in the past. And I think that, more generally speaking, Turkey's inability to change anything in the Syrian equation shows that, after all, Turkey is a rising power which has lots of ambitions, but very poor capacities and resources. And this reminds me of a statement made by an American ambassador which was leaked by WikiLeaks. He said that Turkey has ambitions of a Rolls-Royce, but capacities of a Mercedes. On the international level as well, Turkey finds itself in a situation of isolation. It has a very negative reputation today. The West says that Turkey is a jihadist highway, that people can go very easily from Europe to Syria, crossing the Turkish border. Obviously, this metaphor I mentioned in the beginning of the archery, the metaphor of the archery, we can pull in the Middle East and then reach further in Europe, has completely backfired today, because simply Turkey went too far in terms of supporting Islamist governments, and you cannot be Islamist and European at the same time. And obviously, today at the international level, the Syrian crisis has caused a deterioration in the relations between Russia and Turkey. And I think that the latest episode of Turkey downing a Russian jet is simply a message sent by Erdogan to Putin, saying to him that, please, don't meddle in Syria. Syria is my own backyard. I want to have the spoils of war of Syria. I want Syria to be my hinterland. And actually, he said it in a very stupid way. He said, I don't understand why Russia is involved in Syria. Russia doesn't have a border with Syria while I have border in Syria. And this obviously shows that they don't understand anything to the region and to the equations, political equations in the region. And obviously today, because of this dispute with Russia, Turkey is losing money, is losing trade and commerce with this country, and it is trying today to find a way to compensate this. For example, by conducting a rapprochement with Saudi Arabia in order to be able to import the oil of Saudi Arabia, but also by trying to engage in negotiations with Israel in order to build a new pipeline linking Ashkelon to Ceyhan in Turkey, so that also you can import gas and oil through Israel. And finally, at the national, more domestic and local level in Turkey,
we see that today the AKP has managed to become a hegemonic force, imposing itself at the center of Turkish politics, sort of sidelining any sort of opposition. What's even more dangerous is that there's absolutely no checks and balances against the AKP government today, simply because the army, who was always the guardian, if you want, of the Turkish system, is now sidelined. So the Turkish generals do not have enough power to conduct any sort of check against the AKP. And finally, what we see is that we have a country that is extremely polarized between Turks and Kurds, as I mentioned, but also between the Kemalists, the Kemalist secular establishment, and the Islamist party in power. And finally, a polarization within Islamists themselves, because you have the AKP today conducting a witch hunt against another Islamist movement inside Turkey, which is the Fethullah Gülen movement. And so, given that, I would conclude by saying that maybe Turkey's problem today lies in the fact that Turkey is still in search of its identity, of its post-war identity. Turkey doesn't know if it belongs to the East or to the West. Turkey doesn't know if it's a European country or an Oriental, Islamic, or even Muslim country. And also, I would say that Turkey's difficulties in the Arab world today may lead us to ask ourselves if Turkey has actually achieved a place in the sun in the Middle East during the 2000s, or if it was only able to achieve 15 minutes of fame. Thank you so much for your attention, and I really look forward to your questions and to having a discussion with you.